Welcome to the Dirty Money Diaries. Today, we will be discussing the misfortunes of dating rich men. These are the unspoken truths of dating rich men as a working class woman. Now, these don't apply to all wealthy men, but rather to a specific subset. And to be clear, these aren't rules you should follow. They're the ones that are indirectly placed on you when you enter their world. Also, these dynamics are very different from those faced by wealthy women, who play by an entirely different set of rules. I didn't make these up, they simply exist. So if you're curious about the game, here are some of the unspoken rules you might run into when in this dating pool. In the beginning, they will wine and dine you. They'll butter you up and impress you with lavish dates and expensive outings. But once this initial phase passes, and it passes quickly, you'll find yourself struggling to keep up with their extravagant outings and high demands. In the beginning, it feels like stepping into a whole new world. Suddenly, you're at restaurants you've only ever seen online, eating foods you can barely pronounce, sitting in places you never imagined you'd be. It's glamorous, intoxicating, until you realize it's a recurring script. All of a sudden, the pressure hits. You have to look your best, be desirable, and appear effortlessly beautiful. And of course, we all know beauty comes with a price. Now you're stressing because you don't have an outfit for that event he invited you to next weekend. On top of that, you've got to get your hair done, your nails done, maybe even stock up on all the essentials to keep up appearances. Add gas for driving back and forth to these fancy spots, and suddenly effortless beauty is anything but effortless. Meanwhile, he seems completely oblivious to how expensive this all becomes for you. Not every rich man plays this game, but if you've dated them before, you know the drill, playing catch up. But here's the thing. Physical appearance is only part of the equation. Your looks might get you through the door, but your brains will keep you seated at the table. If you're working class, a student, or tending to family responsibilities, you'll quickly realize you're expected to keep up in other ways too. That means staying sharp on politics, sports, history, and current geopolitical conflicts, because God forbid you come across as dense. But let's be real. Who actually has the time to stay on top of all that while juggling a job, school, or family? That's right, rich people do. And in this game, the rules aren't fair, because they assume you've got the same free time to catch up as they do. Before you know it, staying informed and desirable will become your second job. And this is where the real toll kicks in. It's not just the money you're pouring into clothes, hair, nails, and gas. It's the mental toll too. You start to feel like you're constantly running, constantly behind, like you're never enough unless you're performing. You're not just dating him, you're taking on a second job you never applied for. And the worst part? You can lose sight of who you actually are, because you're so focused on keeping up with who you think you need to be. That's the real game being played here, and it's exhausting. Rule number 2, the unspoken rule. Money is exactly the thing nobody wants to bring up first, yet everyone knows it's lurking in the background. It's uncomfortable. It's messy, and in many cases, it's completely intentional on their part. Some use it as a test. Will she figure it out on her own, or will she ask me for help? Either way, the burden falls on you to navigate the awkwardness of surviving in a world that doesn't truly account for what it actually costs you. Now here's where it gets weird. Some rich men will happily pay for the extras, the outfits, the hair, the nails, the Uber to the gala. Others, they'll act completely oblivious. They know you need the money to keep up with the lifestyle, but they never bring it up, never offer. This one's tricky because it's not about what's said, it's about what's not said. Money. Some rich men will cover your expenses without hesitation. Others will act blind, as if they don't notice the cost of keeping up. And deep down, you know they notice. They just choose not to acknowledge it. But here's the catch. You don't want to be the one to bring it up too soon. Asking for money early on can feel awkward, even taboo. At the same time, if you don't, you're left draining your own bank account trying to stay in a lifestyle you can't afford. So it becomes this unspoken rule, this game of knowing when to ask, if you should ask, and how to read whether he's testing you or just doesn't care. And honestly, it's one of the hardest rules to play, because no matter what move you make, you risk losing. And here's where it gets messy. If you stay silent and never address the money issue, they're the ones who benefit most. Why? Because you end up constantly proving you're not one of those girls who's only in it for the money. So what do? you start acting like the perfect girlfriend. You make yourself super accessible, you run errands, you do little chores, you sleep with them. You give your time, your energy, your body. And what do you get back? A few kisses, gifts, and a fancy dinner, which, let's be honest, doesn't solve any of your actual problems. On top of that, they expect you to always be available. So at a certain point, you really start questioning, why am I even dating a rich man if there are no benefits? Like, let's be real. If I wanted to juggle financial stress, emotional labor, and a man who demands all my time, I could just date in my own league. Because what's the point of a penthouse view if you're drowning in debt and he couldn't care less? This eventually builds into an inevitable standoff, where both sides are waiting to see who will crack first. Beneath the surface, both are hesitant and afraid of essentially the same thing. Women don't want to waste years in a relationship that won't lead to security, nor do they want to be reduced to nothing more than sex. Men, on the other hand, fear being used solely for their wealth or worse, marrying someone who might one day divorce them and cost them fortunes in court. And so, we settle for dating instead. In the end, everyone fears being played or used, but dating is built on that very gamble, one that protects men and costs women more. For women, time, youth, and emotional investment become the unspoken currency, spent long before any security is guaranteed. For men, the stakes are lower. They can prolong the game, enjoy the company, and withhold commitment without consequence. And if you resist, you're reminded how replaceable you are because there's always another woman willing to take your place. The second rule is simple. Sit still and look pretty. Don't be too vocal, too difficult, or too demanding. The less you push back, the better. Complain, and you'll be replaced by someone who won't. At its core, the unspoken rule is to stay quiet and play along. Play along for as long as you can, of course. As we all have our limits and we all face reckoning eventually, the question becomes more about how much you are willing to take and stay silent about. How much can you put up with until it starts to eat away at your pretty frame? When rich men have no limits and vulnerable women blur their boundaries, it almost always ends in disaster because in the end, one pays far more than the other. Here's the thing about dating rich men. Class division is real, and it shows up in ways you don't always expect. Rich men can be surprisingly insensitive at times, not because they're evil, but because they're so far removed from the daily struggles working class people face. They might make offhand comments, joke about things that actually cut deep, or carry this quiet assumption that they're better, whether it's because of money, education, or social circles. And the truth is, a lot of times that distance in class becomes undeniable. The hardest part is when you actually care about them, because then you're torn and your feelings are real, but so is the disconnect. It feels like a core part of who you are is always at odds with them, no matter how much you try to bridge it. Now, this isn't to say all working class people are inherently humble, and all rich men are arrogant. That's not true. But more often than not, wealth creates a blind spot. And being on the other side of that divide, you can feel it in ways they'll never fully understand. Sometimes, dating a rich man will hit you with moments that stop you dead in your tracks. A comment, a joke, or even just the way he responds to something you say, and suddenly you're reconsidering the entire relationship. Connection is the heart of every relationship. If those connection points are shaky, the relationship's future is shaky too. And when class differences keep showing up in the background, that connection becomes harder and harder to maintain. If genuine connection matters to you, and for most of us it does, you will start to notice how exhausting it feels to constantly bridge the gap. Over time, it gets harder to see the relationship as something that can outlast the differences. And when you're giving so much of yourself just to meet in the middle, resentment creeps in. There's nothing that breeds contempt faster than witnessing unchecked entitlement. Whether it's the way he dismisses working class struggles, brags without awareness, or assumes his way is always the better way. Those little moments pile up, and before you know it, you're no longer in love with the person, you're at war with the divide. Rule number 4, hot in theory, not in reality. This one doesn't need much of an explanation. Most of these available rich men are far from your celebrity faves and even further from your type. If they happen to be hot, fit, and attractive, then there's a very high likelihood they're either mentally unstable, emotionally stunted, or impossible to tie down. I don't make the rules. I just learned the hard way that hot and rich usually comes with a warning label. I don't know who needs to hear this, but this isn't a rom-com. I've made it to the other side of this daydream where rich men are tall, dark, and handsome, complete with an accent that could make every word sound like poetry and every lie sound like a song. Prince Charming with heavenly eyes, a face that could make the angels cry, and a bank account that could lift you out of poverty and into the light. But realistically, many of these available men will make you want to run in the opposite direction at first glance. And if they don't scare you right away, just wait until you start talking to them. The dark side of desire. Many of the traits that make these men successful in their fields, their ambition, their control, and their hunger to win at all costs, are the same traits that make them destructive in love. They're drawn to beautiful things like women, art, and experiences, but their relationship to beauty is toxic. They see beauty as something to acquire, to conquer, to display. And once they have it, the thrill starts to fade. That's when the breaking begins, not always loudly, but through small, precise cuts. A condescending remark disguised as humor. A quiet withdrawal of affection. A comparison that leaves you questioning your worth. If you come from a different world than theirs, that difference becomes the backdrop for their quiet ridicule. You'll catch it in a smirk, in sarcasm wrapped in charm, in the way they remind you subtly that you are the one lucky to be there. Their real view of you slips out in fragments, that they are above, and you are replaceable. They crave beauty, but they also resent the power it holds over them. So, they break it, to prove they can. That's the dark side of desire, when admiration turns to resentment, and love becomes a game of dominance and destruction. Because for some of these men, beauty represents everything they can't control. It stirs something in them they despise. Something vulnerable, something human, and that feeling terrifies them. They've spent their lives building walls of power, money, and intellect, all to protect themselves from ever feeling small. But beauty, especially in the form of a woman who manages to make her way through their marble walls, threatens that control. So instead of surrendering to it, they try to dominate it. They turn love into a strategy, affection into leverage, intimacy into performance. They study what makes you glow, just so they can dim it later. They praise your softness, then call it weakness. They admire your independence, then punish you for it. It's a twisted dance between wanting to possess and fearing to be overtaken. And in the end, when they've chipped away at your confidence and watched the light in your eyes fade, there's this eerie calm that settles over them and a quiet satisfaction of knowing they've won. But do they really win when every woman they claim to love eventually leaves them? When their need to control turns warmth into resentment and love into distance? They create the very thing they fear, cold, detached, and calculating women who mirror back the emptiness and indifference they give. They prove that their fear of vulnerability is stronger than their desire for love. That's the irony. They destroy love to protect themselves from it, and in doing so, create the very monsters of their own design, haunted by the women they break.